April 29, 1967. The Sands Hotel, Las Vegas. Dean Martin walks off stage. The applause still vibrates in the walls, but the smile, the one he called his million-dollar yawn, is gone the moment the curtain falls. He heads not to his suite, not to the bar, but to a private dining room in the back. 3 men are waiting. They are not fans. They are not friends. One of them slides a contract across the table, a contract for a performance, a private performance. For an audience of 1. A man whose name you didn't say out loud if you wanted to keep your knees intact. Dean looks at the paper, he looks at the men, and he says the one word no one in this town, in this world, ever said to them. No. The air leaves the room. One of the men leans forward, his voice a low scrape of gravel and threat. You don't understand what you're saying, Dino. But Dean Martin understood perfectly. He'd understood for 20 years. And saying that word in that room to those men, it wasn't an act of defiance. It was a suicide note. Because in 1967 you did not refuse the mob, not if you wanted to keep breathing. So why did he do it? What secret was so terrible, so devastating, that Dean Martin finally decided he had nothing left to lose? To understand that night, you have to go back. Back before the Rat Pack, before the records, before the legend. Back to the steel and smoke of Steubenville, Ohio. A boy named Dino Crosti, son of an immigrant barber who spoke only Italian until he was 5. The world was loud, confusing, and he learned to move through it with a quiet watchfulness. He found his escape in the movies, in the smooth voices crooning from the radio. He saw a world of sharp suits and softer lights, a world that felt a million miles from the grid under his fingernails. He dropped out of school at 16. He dealt blackjack. He worked in a steel mill. He boxed. He learned to take a punch, and more importantly, he learned to make people laugh while he was doing it. That was the survival skill, the smile that disarmed, the joke that deflected. It was armor forged in the heartland long before Hollywood ever knew his name. The war came. A bad kidney kept him out of the service. A twist of fate that would later breed whispers, but in that moment it sent him down a different path. He was singing in small clubs, a voice like poured honey over crushed velvet, when a young comic named Jerry Lewis saw him. It was chemical, atomic, the handsome crooner and the chaotic monkey. They exploded, Martin and Lewis. Overnight, they weren't just stars, they were a national phenomenon. The money was a waterfall. The fame was a hurricane. But look closer at the early films, the publicity stills. See how Dean holds himself just slightly apart, even in the embrace of manic joy. The smile reaches his mouth, but does it always reach his eyes? He was the straight man, the foil, the good-looking idiot, as he called himself. But he felt the imbalance. He heard the critics who called him just a prop, a clothes horse for Jerry's genius. The resentment began as a slow drip, a quiet corrosion in the gold-plated cage of their partnership. And this is where the shadows begin to lengthen. This is where the other men enter the picture. The men in the good suits who didn't need to shout. The early 1950s. Las Vegas is a glittering oasis run by desert wolves. The casinos, the nightclubs, they are not corporate enterprises. They are fiefdoms. And to play in the biggest rooms, the rooms that make careers, you played by their rules. Dean Martin, skyrocketing to fame, was a valuable commodity. And valuable commodities attract investors. According to multiple biographies, according to FBI files later released, Dean's early career, like Frank Sinatra, like so many others, was gently, firmly guided by certain associates. A favor here, a loan there, a packed house guaranteed. It was the way things were done, the unspoken tax on stardom. Dean accepted it. He was a practical man from a practical town. This was just another part of the business, or so he told himself. The break with Jerry Lewis was a public earthquake. 1956, the end of a decade-long partnership. It was messy, brutal, played out in screaming headlines and bitter silences. The world took sides, but in the wreckage, Dean Martin did something extraordinary. He didn't just survive, he ascended. His solo album, Memories Are Made of This, went to #1. He became a movie star in his own right in dramas like The Young Lions, holding his own against Brando. He was no one straight man anymore. He was Dino, king of cool, the man who made it all look effortless. The glass in his hand, always with a finger's width of amber liquid, was as much a part of his persona as his voice. It was a prop, a character detail. But for the men watching from the shadows, the men who considered themselves his silent partners, that glass represented something else. It represented a man they understood, a man of appetites, a man they believed who belonged to their world. Enter the Summit, the early 1960s, the Rat Pack at its peak. Frank, Dean, Sammy, Joey, Peter, shooting Ocean's 11 asterisk by day, holding court at the Sands by night. It was the ultimate boys' club, a vortex of talent, ego, and sheer intoxicating power. Dean was Frank's right hand, his pally. The chemistry was real, a bond forged in Italian-American kinship and shared showmanship. But even here in the inner circle, Dean maintained a distance. He'd often slip away early, back to his family, back to solitude while the parties raged on. He was playing a role within a role, the lovable drunk, the unflappable hedonist. The press ate it up, but those close to him knew the truth. The glass was often ginger ale. The slur was an act. He was, in many ways, the most sober man in the room. He was constructing a persona so bulletproof, so charming, that no one would ever look behind it. No one would ever see the quiet calculations, the careful navigations, the debts that were coming due. But the men in the shadows never forget a debt. The first real crack in the facade came not from the mob but from the studio. 1964. Dean is offered a television show by NBC. The Dean Martin Show asterisk. He's reluctant. Television is work. Dean's entire philosophy, his brand, is anti-work. He famously wanted to fly in on a crane, tell a few jokes, sing a song, and fly out. So he makes an absurd demand. He will only do the show if he doesn't have to rehearse. It's a bluff, a way to say no without saying no. To his astonishment, NBC agrees. The show is a monstrous hit. It makes him one of the wealthiest entertainers on the planet. He has achieved a level of independence, of pure commercial power that is almost unparalleled. For the first time, Dean Martin doesn't need anyone, not a partner, not a studio boss, and he begins to quietly believe, not the silent partners from the old days. This is where the tension begins to coil. Like a snake under the desert sun, his success is a beacon, and to the old world thinking of certain individuals, a beacon is something you own. You protect your investments, you remind them of their obligations. The requests start again, but they are no longer requests. They are expectations. Appear at this club opening. Say hello to this friend of a friend. And then the big one, the private performance. For a high roller, a made man celebrating something or other. It was the ultimate marker of respect, of control. To have Dean Martin sing That's Amore in your living room. Sinatra had done it. Others had done it. It was part of the currency. But Dean was done. Which brings us back to that room. April 29, 1967, the Sands, the contract on the table. The man across from him is not a small-time hood. He is a lieutenant. His name is in FBI ledgers. His eyes are flat like 2 dimes. It's just one night, Dino, be a friend. But Dean is tired of being a friend on those terms. The persona, the careful navigation, the quiet fear he'd carried for nearly 2 decades, it has calcified into something harder, something like resolve. Or maybe it was just a profound, bone-deep exhaustion. He thinks of Steubenville. Of his father's barber shop, a place of dignity built on real work. He thinks of the steel mill, the honest sweat. This was not that. This was a gilded leash. He says no. The lieutenant's face doesn't change, but the man next to him, a younger, hotter-headed guy, shifts in his chair. The threat in the room is no longer implied. It is a physical presence thick as the cigar smoke. You have a beautiful family, Dean, the lieutenant says softly, examining his own manicured nails. A lovely home in Beverly Hills. You should think about them, think about your health. It's all there in that coded language, the threat to his children, to his wife, to his physical safety. Dean Martin stands up. He straightens the cuffs of his tuxedo jacket, a movement so casual it is itself an act of defiance. He looks at each man slowly, and then he says something that, according to a source who was a Sands employee and spoke decades later on condition of anonymity, chilled the blood of everyone present. He didn't shout. He didn't lean in. He just said it with the quiet clarity of a man who has already written his own ending. You tell your boss I'm retired from that kind of work, and if he has a problem with it, he knows where to find me, but tell him this too. If anything, anything happens to my family or to me, the first call I make isn't to my lawyer. It's to every newspaper and television station in the country. I will sit down and I will tell them everything, every name, every favor, every bag that changed hands in a parking lot. I will burn your whole world down with me. And you know I'll do it, because you know I don't give a damn. He walked out. He left them sitting there. In the world they ruled, this was an unthinkable act. It was a declaration of war. What happened next shocked everyone. Because nothing happened. No car accident, no mysterious fire, no canceled contracts. There was a cold, silent standoff. Dean went about his business. The show taped. The record sold. But behind the scenes, according to former associates interviewed for a 1998 documentary, a frantic series of negotiations took place at the highest, most shadowy levels. The old guard was furious, but a newer, more corporate-minded faction was emerging. They saw Dean Martin not as a disobedient asset, but as a massive, uncontrollable liability. A public war with America's favorite drunk uncle was bad for business. The word came down. Let it go. Dean Martin, through sheer, reckless courage, had called their bluff, and he had won. But this is not a story about winning. This is a story about the cost. The victory was Pyrrhic. The fear didn't leave him, it just changed shape. It became a quiet paranoia, a lingering dread in the pit of his stomach. He became more reclusive. The distance he always kept became a chasm. His marriage, long strained by his lifestyle and absences, fell apart. The glass in his hand, once a prop, now often held the real thing. The drinking was no longer a character note. It was a refuge. The easy smile became harder to summon. He was a man who had stared into the abyss of organized crime and told it to go to hell. And part of him never really climbed back out of that abyss. Look at the later performances. Look at the eyes. There's a sadness there, a deep-water sorrow that the jokes can't quite reach. He had defied the most powerful, ruthless men in the underworld and lived. But the man who walked away from that table in the sands was not the same man who sat down at it. Something in him had been spent. The carefree aura was a masterpiece of acting. He was living the aftermath every single day. In 1987, his son, Dean Paul Martin, a rising star in his own right, died tragically in a military jet crash. The loss shattered what was left of Dean's spirit. The world saw a grieving father, and they were right. But those who knew the whole story saw a man being punished by a universe he had dared to challenge decades before. The guilt was oceanic. Had his choices, his defiance, somehow bent the arc of fate toward this unbearable pain? He retreated almost completely, a ghost in his own Beverly Hills mansion. He died on Christmas Day, 1995. The headlines called him a legend, an icon of ease. They talked about the songs, the movies, the Rat Pack. They did not talk about the private room at the Sands. They did not talk about the contract. They did not talk about the quiet, earth-shattering asterisk no that cost him his peace for the rest of his life. Hollywood has a machine for this. A machine that polishes legends, that sands down the rough, dangerous edges of truth until all that's left is a smooth, marketable statue. They wanted you to remember the crooner, the comedian, the king of cool. They did not want you to remember the man from Steubenville who knew the price of everything, who carried a secret terror for 20 years, and who one night, decided that living in fear was worse than dying from it. They buried the confession, not one spoken into a tape recorder, but one screamed in a silent room through an act of impossible defiance. This is the real Dean Martin story, not a biography of fame, but a confession of fear and of the terrible price of freedom. It's a story they tried to hide in plain sight, behind a smile and a raised glass. But the glass, if you look closely enough, was always a shield. And behind it was just a man, trying to be his father's son in a world that had no use for honest men. If you're still here, you understand now. This isn't just about old Hollywood gossip. This is about the moments of quiet bravery that never make the history books, the choices that break a man even as they set him free. At Hollywood Untold Files, we dig for those stories. We listen for the echoes in the silent rooms, because some truths are too heavy to stay buried forever. They have a way of surfacing like a secret whispered from one generation to the next. If you believe those truths deserve a witness, then you're one of us. Help us keep uncovering them. Subscribe, share this story, and let us know in the comments which legend's buried truth should we excavate next. The final irony, the one that would have made Dean give that wry, sad smile. He spent a lifetime building a persona of not caring, but the one thing he ever truly, dangerously cared about was the right to say no. And that care is what finally, slowly destroyed him. The mob couldn't break Dean Martin, but being the man who beat them, that did.